Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Fandom Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin, and tonight we are doing the Season 7 Fight Club. Which episodes were essential, which were not? What did you think of the season? Let's duke it out with our opinions. But before we start, let's have our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Carole.
Hi, I'm Carole Stokes. I'm a fanfic writer, a fan of Supernatural since season 3. You can find all of my fanfic on AO3 under that's just Fire Sign 10. You can find me on Twitter under true_Fire Sign 10. And everything Supernatural is wonderful to me.
Elektra.
I'm Elektra Hammond. I'm a writer and an editor, and I've been watching Supernatural since that very first episode caught my eye.
All right, Melissa.
I'm a stalker of certain fanfic writers and Supernatural Facebook groups. And I've been a fan since the beginning.
I'm Gail Z. Martin and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic fantasy, urban fantasy, and more. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance, but all the modern worlds are ones where Sam and Dean could walk in and feel right at home. I've been a fan since season 11, but I've made up for it with passion and obsession. And I also run the Supernatural TFWNC group here on Facebook. I was asked to contribute a chapter to There'll Be Peace When You Are Done. And I'm a staff writer now for the Winchester Family Business, which brings us to the topic of the evening. Entertainment Weekly ranked the 75 most essential episodes. That was before season 15 came out. And in each season, it usually picked somewhere between 4 and 6 episodes as essential, relegated the rest to the also ran. Along the way, I had quibbles with that, so I ended up writing an article series for my page in the Winchester Family Business, and that's kind of why we started the Fight Club, to sort of disagree or agree, or just let our opinions be known on what episodes we thought were important. So before we get into what Entertainment Weekly said, what did you guys think of the episodes and the season, and what stood out to you, good and bad? Elektra?
I'm going back to the cat show world to talk about this one. Sometimes when we talk about cats, we talk about playing Mr. Potato Head, where we take a cat and we want to take the head from that cat and the body from that cat, the coat from that cat in order to make a really good one. There are bits and pieces of episodes from this season that I want to keep around. There were a couple of characters introduced, and there were a few concepts here and there that I thought were important for relationships, but there were very few full episodes that I'm like, oh yeah, you got to watch that episode front to back and pay really a lot of attention to it, because most of them I were like, yeah, toss it out the window. And a lot of that was, I didn't like what they did to some of my favorite characters, and I did not like the idea of the Leviathans, and I didn't enjoy them chasing around. Okay. I'll let other people talk before we get into details.
Melissa?
There were a few episodes that I thought you needed to see front to back. The first one, Meet the New Boss, I think that sets up the entire season. And even though we all know this is not a great season, I feel like you have to have that one. And then there were some really key moments in several of these across the season that I really feel like you have to have had those moments, even if you were sort of like reading a book or writing fanfic while you're watching. There were some moments where you really needed to pay attention. You really needed to experience.
Carole?
I'm going to go against the tide a little bit here. I like the Leviathans. I thought they were creepy. They were toothy. And they were so seemingly invincible that there's a lot of actual, how the heck are they going to get past these guys. You know, they were not insubstantial as an arc-wide bad guy. And I liked how they really had to struggle. I kind of, as much as I missed some of their stuff that Sam and Dean have gotten used to, I kind of liked seeing them really stripped down. They were running on fumes there. You know, they didn't have baby. They couldn't even stay in cheesy motels, so they're squatting everywhere. You know, they really went bare bones in this. And I kind of liked that. You know, I liked how they were really the underdog in this and had to prove their mettle, as it were. And then certainly there are some really delightful Monster of the Weeks, you know, kind of perking things up along the way. So I won't say I am completely enamored of season 7, but I thought it was a good solid season. And I liked several of the episodes.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that, Carol. When I revisited it, there were more episodes that I liked than I remembered liking.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the premise with Dick Roman and the Leviathans could have been done better. Sometimes it seemed a little heavy-handed. Let's talk about what's wrong with Big Pharma. A little out there, but I've always been suspicious of turducken, so it did kind of reinforce and substantiate my concerns. I cooked one of those things once. They were not good.
I just want to interject that I also think that Dick Roman is really underestimated as a villain, and even in fanfic, you get Lucifer all the time, you know, Mark Pellegrino, and you get this guy all the time, and you get Mark Shepard all the time. And Dick Roman, and he is evil. He is polished and sophisticated and slimy AF and evil. And he's a wonderful foil, you know, that I think people overlook sometimes because he is so amoral. He doesn't have bad morals. He just doesn't have any morals.
And I thought he was playing very well. The actor played
yeah. And I thought James Patrick Stewart did a really terrific job with him.
And I'm pretty sure I might have worked with him during my corporate days. I mean, no, Dick Roman, not James.
Oh, Dick Roman, not James Patrick Stewart. I was like,
okay, I'd like to point out that these panels work great when we don't agree. So I think it's awesome that we don't. It's less fun when we're all in total agreement, nodding our heads a lot. So this is great.
So let's look at what Entertainment Weekly said was essential, because this was not an episode that
not much.
No, they
didn't think much of this season either.
Death's Door, which of course gives us a lot of background on Bobby. It's probably it's one of my favorite Bobby episodes. So real strong there with Rufus as his psychopomp, herding him toward the other side.
Points for psychopomp.
Huh?
Points for psychopomp.
I love that word. Your guide to the afterworld. The girl with the Dungeons and Dragon tattoo, which of course, you know, is
Charlie, who is one of my favorite absolute characters in this.
And we find out
everything else.
Yes.
I can watch Felicia Day in anything.
I love her. And we find out about her tattoo, which, hey, it was Comic-Con. She was drunk. Nobody judged. And then Survival of the Fittest, which was more of a Dick Roman episode. And that's it.
Three? Really? 3
out of 23. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Well, not a lot happened.
Bring it.
And I will say, I don't understand why they sent them to squatting in houses, like abandoned houses, why they didn't just go back to credit card scams. Because I understand they can trace you, but if they were careful about not using like the same card twice, I don't see how they could have been traced.
I just like they had to really be resourceful. You know, they really had to scrape themselves together to, you know, to even keep going, much less.
Oh,
make
it got
progress,
tired
you know,
towards
so
the end
that
when it was
you know,
questionable what they could safely eat.
oh, that too. But even before that, it's like the, you know, they had nothing. They had nothing. And we saw yet how they still continued to fight, and they still picked themselves up by their bootstraps and went on. So I wouldn't have wanted to see it more than this, but for this season, it really kind of added to that. They're facing these huge odds, these leviathans from like beyond time and space. I mean, these are Lovecraftian beings, and they just don't have anything. You know, they don't have a network. They have Bobby, but they lose him halfway through. You know, and they pull it together. So
I think that they were trying to show them off their game. And I think, you know, you're right, Carol, we're seeing them stripped down to bare bones. They've got to come up with a whole new playbook. This is not the way their dad taught them to hunt. And so it is really them on their own against a monster they've never faced before. And of course, we also get introduced to Frank Devereaux, who is kind of the crazy conspiracy theory. Not only in this case, he's mostly right. But I was very glad to see them get Baby back and kind of get back to the way things.
And you can't beat that shot of Baby coming up and plunging through that Sucre Corp sign as a triumphant, you know, F you.
Driven by Meg.
Well, and Meg hopping out of it with a bottle of borax in one hand and a machete in the other.
I mean, that's a
she's
wonderful,
just a badass.
That was great. That is just great. And they get Baby back in a blaze of glory.
Yeah. Melissa, what about you?
The episode 11, Adventures in Babysitting, on the rewatch, because you wouldn't have caught it before then. Bobby's dead, and Sam's asking Dean, should we call Bobby's people and tell them that he's died? And Dean's like, I'm not calling anybody. You could just go ahead and do that if you want to. And Sam's like, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not making those calls. Flash forward to the finale of the series, when we see Sam answering Dean's phone, and we realize Sam hasn't told anybody that Dean's dead. So this was, to me, a really nice, they wrote it here, and then you can see it in the finale. And so that really, like, when I was rewatching, I stopped everything and made frantic, furious notes about that, because that was, to me, an interesting callback that they did in the finale for something that they did in this season that I didn't. There were moments in this season I liked, but I didn't really love this season.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, that was a good moment, but that was an episode that you could pretty much throw away. It was another character we saw, a monster we saw once. We never see them again. And I will note that this must have been the first season that they were shooting Chesapeake Shores in Vancouver, because there are at least 3 major actors from Chesapeake Shores that show up in this season, which I thought was funny as heck, because one of the Vitalas is Megan Ory, and there are 2 other actors who are like her siblings who show up in this season. So they must have been hanging around looking for work.
I thought this episode was interesting, though, because there's a young girl, and she's what Dean could have, she's heading down the same path that Sam and Dean were in. So I thought it was interesting to see Dean's reactions to her and how he was handling her, and how he flat out told her father, you've got to get out of the life. And it's kind of like, gee, I wish someone had done that to John when Dean was this age or younger.
Mm-hmm.
Bobby
tried.
It just wasn't working.
I think 2 of my favorites on the Monster of the Week side of things are Time After Time and Plucky Penny Whistle's Magical Menagerie. time after time because Jensen looks damn fine in a fedora and 1940s clothing. I mean, come on.
Okay, just Elliot Ness was a hunter. Just that whole episode is just fun. You don't need it to get through what's going on. It doesn't advance the plot of the season at all, but goddamn, that's a fun episode.
Point of
You
trivia.
can,
Oh, go ahead. Point of trivia, because I used Elliot Ness in one of our Joe Mack adventures, where he, in 1929 Chicago, gets in over his head with an occult mess that Al Capone left behind. Elliot Ness was 26 years old when he busted Al Capone and led the Untouchables. And we've always seen him on TV and in movies played by some middle-aged guy. He's 26. So that's just one of those things that blows my mind every time I think of it. Go ahead.
I think there's one really important thing though that happens in Time After Time. I mean, I really enjoy it. I enjoy the, of course, how
Shoulder holes.
fantastic Dean looks. I love the whole thing of how they managed to figure out to communicate. It's brilliant. But the thing that struck me, a theme in this whole season is Dean is struggling.
yes.
He's got his beautiful mind brother. He's facing an alien evil that he has no idea what to do about. Okay, they don't know how to kill them. It takes them forever to even find the borax. They don't know what they're doing. So he's feeling way over his head in all ways. And at one point he unburdens himself to Elliot Ness a little bit. And Elliot Ness is like, are they all like Nancy's like you in the future? Because dude, you're a professional and hunting gives you your clarity in life. And so as we see Dean struggling through this episode, there are 2 or 3 points where it is brought home to him, and this is one of them, that he needs to buck the up and keep going. It's not about how you feel, sailor. It's you just got to keep going. That's just how it works. So there's a couple of the other episodes would be when Frank Devereaux tells him this, says you've got to be a professional. And we have that horrible scene at the very end of that episode where he's listening to one of my favorite bands and songs, Traffic, Dear Mr. Fantasy, and trying to smile, and it's just like a rictus on his face, as he's trying to do this. So, it's a recurring kind of thing that pops up, I think, through this season, that Dean's overwhelmed, he's ready to give up, and he somehow has to find the wherewithal to keep going. And it isn't Sam, because Sam's fallen apart beside him and is barely moving along as well, So it's a bleak season, but there are the humor parts, definitely.
Okay, necessary pieces. I almost say you don't really need to see Meet the New Boss so much as you need to see Hello Crew World, because that's where it sets up Cass exploding and you see the birth of the Leviathans. And that's where we get the important stuff with Jody getting rescued out of the hospital by Bobby, and the realization that these guys are just eating people, and everybody totally freaking out, and we lose Bobby's place. And we start to understand that this season's going to be like no other in terms of losses. That these guys just, at the flip of a hat, it's like, oh, you needed that spot to go back to? Well, we torched it to the ground. So find someplace else to go.
It reminded me a little of the book in the Harry Dresden series called Changes, where, aptly named, Harry
Everything changes.
Yeah, he loses the Blue Beetle. His apartment burns down. His friends die.
His back is broken.
Yeah, and it's a way of transitioning the character to a whole new arc and leveling him up. But it's painful for him and for everybody who cares about him. Melissa, what do you think?
Hello Cruel World had the stone #1 moment, and that you have to have that moment. To understand the boys after this point, you gotta have that moment. And I just love that scene. So I thought this episode was good because I'm like, when am I gonna get to that scene?
Well, I want to go back to Plucky Penny Whistles because that's one of my favorite Monster of the Weeks here. And it's probably influenced by the countless hours I spent with 3 children at Chuck E. Cheese. And so the idea that the ball washer did it doesn't surprise me at all. Or that there
The
could
ball
be
washer? What? The ball washer? What?
or that there could be a demonic ritual going on in the basement. Pretty sure that might have been there. But I loved the insight that we got into Sam being left there like this was maybe a good thing, and it really wasn't. I love the idea that this was the whole idea of making people's fears tangible was, I thought, interesting. And how and Dean's wistfulness for that stupid rainbow slinky. So simple. He asks for so little, but damn, he wanted that slinky. Big bad Dean Winchester lit up with a rainbow slinky. And I can even tell you, because we've had many of them, they break really easily, they're brittle, but they're kind of cool.
And
So-
I think, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying it may have been a Monster of the Week episode that didn't do a whole lot to advance the arc, but I thought we got some very interesting character insights there into both Sam and Dean and Glitter.
I also think it was one of those refreshing moments we need. We're coming off Bobby's death time after time, Dean having a demon child and having to have her killed and all this stuff. And we needed a breath again. You know, we needed a moment of like, let's catch our breath. Here's some humor. Let's see the boys, you know, doing their thing, and great moments like the ball washer never fails to crack me up. You know, and tackling the stoned lion and you know, all of that. And then, because then from there, we're going to go right into a bunch of dark stuff again. Sam in the psych ward, demon possession, and of, you know, all kinds of stuff that are just going to be really dark again. And here we have that moment of, you know, and I think we get that also with Party on Garth.
Mhm.
I just think is great. It's just fun. It's just fun. They get to get drunk all the time. You know, they're constantly running to that Japanese hibachi house or whatever to have the guy translating stuff, performing the Shinto ritual. And Garth, I always find Garth amusing. And he's like, I drank a whole beer. You know, of course I'm drunk. You know, what was it? So they're drinking in the guy's office, and Dean is like, me like it. I mean, there's just
and the question of Dean, is it even possible for you to get drunk anymore?
right. I mean, just some really great stuff, and the hint of like, is Bobby there? What's happening? You know, so just as a standalone break, I liked that. I really thought that. See, I would have picked more maybe for, in terms of understanding Dean, I think defending your life was important. We get to the root of Dean dealing with his guilt, you know, and here the guilt is about Joe, but really Dean has guilt about everything. So here we're dealing with Dean having to deal with some guilt.
Well, and Amy Pond, he's dealing with a lot of guilt about
Right.
killing.
And Amy Pond, absolutely.
Well, and he doesn't want Amy Pond to end up testifying. But
Right.
that's a very weird co-dynamic they have going on, is the episode with Amy Pond, where Sam doesn't find out she gets killed until defending your life. But how do you justify leaving her alive?
I mean,
And
he actually doesn't find out until Slash Fiction.
Right.
he doesn't know it in Defending Your Life. It's in
Okay.
Slash Fiction when the Leviathans are them. And Leviathan, one of them spills to Sam, oh yeah, and he's
Yep.
like, what? So
Right. You're right there.
Yeah,
But
it's,
how do you justify leaving her alive or even leaving the kid alive when they have to survive by killing people? I mean,
I always
she found a way around it, except if they're not feeling well, the only way around that is to do fresh spraying.
Now, if they
clearly-
could have been hunters and you know, taken the fresh brains from demon possessed dead people, maybe that would have worked. But I
that's like
expect
she was a
the kid to choke.
mortuary, you know, she worked as a mortician.
Right,
Yeah,
but when the
yeah.
kid got sick, he needed, you know,
Fresh
from
brains,
live
absolutely.
people.
No, you're absolutely right. And
Yeah.
but
So
I
there
think
was
that's
there was a
the
real issue there.
But
And
Sam
then-
couldn't see past it because of his affection for her.
Right.
Until
And the flip side of that was the Amazon, where
Yes.
was that kid redeemable? At the point where they killed her, she hadn't killed anybody yet. And she was Dean's kid. And I can't believe they didn't make more of an effort to like bring her along and try and redeem her. They pick up every other stray, and yet Dean's daughter got killed and left behind.
I can only think that they were using it, as we have seen before, a mirror. Here we have Dean saving Sam from himself and doing something that Sam couldn't bring himself to do. And then we have Sam saving Dean from himself and bringing himself to do something Dean couldn't do. So I think it was, as I saw it, it was one of those mirrored instances. You
But
know,
she wasn't a
where they
monster yet.
and Sam does come to say, you know, I understand now why you killed Amy. And yet going back to an episode that we just watched in the group with 2.5 Men from season 6, they even passed on the shifter baby to the Campbells and presumably raised it. I don't think we ever found out that they like just killed it.
It went to Australia with Jesse.
Because nothing ever apparently comes back from Australia. Sorry, Aussie fans out there.
Well, but Dean let Amy Pond's son go. And he is presumably was killing people to survive because he didn't have a job in a mortuary.
Yeah.
And again, his daughter hadn't killed anyone yet.
No, that's a good point.
So I understand the whole mirror thing, but it just seemed like they really missed something there, and that she wasn't a monster yet, and they were trying to redeem the young ones mostly.
She was threatening Dean, and Sam wasn't going to have that. I'm sorry. Like, Dean might not have been able to defend himself because of that hesitation of she hasn't done anything bad yet. Sam's not going to take that chance.
They weren't sitting there talking.
Yeah.
Maybe she was redeemable. She was half hunter.
Yeah. And they do get better about some of these things as we go on, but I agree. It was one of those that kind of clashes. One of the other ones that I liked that wasn't necessarily a big arc story is of grave importance, where we got to see Bobby and Annie in the haunted hotel, the foxhole episode.
I like that a lot for what we get to see about Bobby again, you know, and him struggling to come to terms with his ghosthood, you know. And I thought they just fleshed out everything around the case really well. You know, the other ghosts who were involved. And the focus wasn't necessarily on Sam and Dean. It was kind of on everything else. And it's kind of refreshing to see that once in a while, just to kind of see what's the rest of the world like when we're not seeing it solely through Winchester eyes.
Well, there's also a lot there on the different kinds of ghosts and what they can do and what their attitudes are like. You know, the big bad, and I've been here for 80 years and I can do all these things. And the woman and all the other ghosts that were frightened of him and what the new ghosts can and can't do.
Mhm.
And there was a lot of really meaty stuff in there. And then the joke through the whole episode of, well, everybody had a moment with Annie. And nobody had realized previously that everybody else had, well, they all knew, Sam and Dean both knew that Bobby had, but they didn't realize each other had. And Bobby didn't know about the boys.
Right. He's like,
And-
no, you don't understand. Ours was special.
And Sam's comment, I didn't have a soul.
Yeah, well, we were, yeah, and that was his excuse. But apparently, you
John
know,
had a
Annie
moment.
was very lonely.
Mhm. Well, and that kind of thing, I mean,
If
It's
you were in a foxhole with one of those guys, wouldn't you have taken advantage of
Oh,
it?
I wouldn't have said no.
hey, look, even Hawkeye and Hot Lips Houlihan had a foxhole moment. So,
Good point. Good point.
so the probably most controversial episode is season 7, Time for a Wedding, where we get to see Becky again. And this is interesting because we've seen these fan-centered episodes with Monster at the End of the Book, and we saw it with the Real Ghostbusters with the convention. Now we're back to the fangirl again. Only this time, at least for many people, it felt like there was a lot more of an edge to the depiction, where it had been kind of funny in Monster at the End of the book. It had been funny but touching with the Real Ghostbusters. This crossed a lot of lines, and not only with the non-con, but with the very unflattering depiction of fans that we didn't see in the other two. So where are we on this? This is a new showrunner now.
It's
Yeah, what do you think?
there's something there that a lot of people can relate to. I'm going back to my ex reunion and I want to show whoever that I am successful in some way. I have a job, I have a husband, whatever. And that's something an awful lot of people can relate to. The going back to your reunion and showing yourself as more successful than when you were in school, to the people who were mean to you. There's a whole lot of people that can relate to that. It's an interesting theme, and the idea that she would go to somebody that she thought was a friend and he was giving her a love potion to make it happen, and it turned out, oh no, the first one's free, but now I want you to give me your soul. It's a very interesting twist on that one. I mean, there were a lot of interesting things about that episode, and the way they handled the Crossroads demon who was, who had found a way to cheat on the contracts. But yeah, the relationships based on love potions never work.
Listen, Carole, anything to add on that?
I have a hard time with this episode. The whole non-con thing really yanks me out of the story. And it's a shame because there are some moments where it's really funny things happening and there's really interesting things happening. But we see Becky and we see she's got that edge of desperate fangirl in the previous times we see Becky. But in this, she crossed a line that changed her character for me, because I don't, that whole, yeah, she's desperate to have somebody to go to the reunion with, but maybe if she had just asked Sam, Sam's not a bad guy. Sam's a big old puppy dog. And the whole roofing him, that was a deal breaker for me. So this episode isn't fun. Although the wedding chapel, that was interesting. That's always going to be an interesting scene.
This is a Buck Lemming episode, isn't it? I mean, they seem to be the ones that are always write the non-con episodes.
I'm sorry, who?
Buck, the portmanteau
Oh,
is
Buck
Buck.
Lennon?
Yeah. They just always seem to have the non-con ones. Carol, what do you think?
I totally agree. The non-con yanks me out of it. And the depiction of Becky yanks me out of it. Like, we've seen Becky now a couple of times. Becky's amusing, nerdy, awkward, but we can still relate to her. Okay. Anybody who's been to a con and puts their hand on Jared's chest is going to be like firm. You know, I mean, it's just
Somebody referred to that as the mountains of Texas. I'm just saying.
But we can relate with her. We're laughing with her.
Mm-hmm.
This episode, A, we're not laughing with her, and B, we're not laughing at all because the roofie thing is unacceptable. It's just unacceptable. Okay, there's just no way to play that for laughs. You can do it in Law and Order because you're making a point, but you can't do it in Supernatural and try to make it be funny. It's not. It's you take her from being awkward and
Funny.
lonely to, you know, creepy and abusive, really. So that yanks me right out to begin with. And then she freaking ties him up, and, you know, it's just, it's a hot mess. I understand the whole reunion thing and her desperation. I totally get that, but they made her so OOC to me that I didn't care, you know. And really the only worthwhile thing to note for me in that episode is that that's Lamar Odom, who goes on to incredible fame and accolades in Hamilton and is now this huge Broadway star. You know, it's like, wow, we saw him as this little, you know,
I was
spell
glad
peddler.
that Becky got something of a redemption episode in season
Absolutely.
15.
And that was far more in character when we see her down the pike. And I'm so glad that we did, because she got to get redeemed. This would have been a horrible note to have her character end on. You know, that she built a character, it worked, it meshed. They did this horrible thing and had her do horrible things. And at least they didn't leave her there. So that's something. But I was really, I was appalled at how they had her act. And I was appalled that, could they actually view anybody like this? Like, where did this come from? And do you really look down on fangirls and fans in general like that? Because that ain't cool.
Well, and if you've read Lynn Supernis's Fangirls, Supernatural Fangirls, and her more academic version of that book, she talks about fan shaming and how it gets particularly, women are usually the ones who are fan shamed for loving something that doesn't happen to guys like that. And yeah, it was, I felt that they were laughing with us in the first two. I felt like they were laughing at us in Time for a Wedding. And it's the same kind of thing where I could appreciate the cleverness in the Big Bang Theory series, but I always felt like the humor was mocking instead of with us. And I could never get into that series for that reason. So yeah, I was glad that Becky got a redemption in the end, although it was a long time coming.
And kudos to the actress for taking a character that could be, in fact, either unlikable or whatever, and giving her that heart, that even as she was writing her horrible fiction, you know, and all of this, nonetheless, you know, endeared herself to us, you know. And in the very beginning, I was even like, okay, you know, something's happening clearly, but it wasn't until we got to the point that we realized she's drugging him that we're like, that's it, we're done.
Yeah, that one just needs to go.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
It's unneeded. All right, there are a couple we just haven't touched on really.
Okay.
Or slash fiction is one of the important things we haven't mentioned is the whole bit with Jody deciding to clean up the cabin and the borax through the floor.
Mhm.
Sometimes you research to figure out how to kill things, and sometimes you accidentally figure it out when somebody else is cleaning your house. And that was just, I mean, otherwise no one knew anything about the Leviathans, and they just could not figure out how to kill them.
It was really fun though to see the Leviathans as Sam and Dean, even though they were horrible. You know, I mean,
and caused them all that trouble.
Right, but it was kind of kick-ass to see them, you know, in this whole different light, and the whole, you know, he tastes like, you know, wilted greens and, you know, self depreciation or whatever, when he's talking about Sam's salad. But I think the one thing that does happen besides all of the fun stuff is at the end, because Sam finds out about Amy Pond, he leaves. He's like, you know what, I need a break, and he leaves, you know, and so they're apart again for the first time in a while, you know, on purpose.
Okay, and according to the wiki, somewhere in that episode, S.E. Hinton has cameo. I don't know where.
He's in the diner. She's in the diner when he shoots it up.
Which is just cool.
And then, so then the following episode with the mentalists, they get back together to work just for the case, but then Sam finally in the end says, all right, we can work back together, but no lies, you know, no more lies, which of course Dean just freaking cannot help himself and get in his own way, but that's later. That's in the future.
Well, and several times with things like that, it's what I keep referring to as forced errors, where the writers want to maneuver them into a certain place, so they make them do something really dumb in order to make that happen, that 2 sentences of dialogue would have fixed. And that annoys me. If they're going to be at odds, then let's make it over something real, not that Sam didn't finish his sentence like in season 9, or that someone just didn't ask a question. That's, to me, lazy writing, and that always annoys me when they do it, and they do it fairly often.
The other one that I really want to make sure we talk about is reading is fundamental.
Yes, absolutely.
Where we get the payoff from the girl with the Dungeons and Dragons tattoo, where they've got this piece of rock that they break into, and we discover how exactly it is that they notify prophets that they're being called. And we get to meet Kevin Tran, who is such a fun character that we get him for a couple of seasons. And we discover what the Leviathan tablet and the whole idea of tablets and the word of God, and that no one can read them but prophets.
And poor Kevin, he
real concept of prophets.
And Kevin just wants to pass his AP test. He really, you know, poor kid.
I feel bad for him because, you know, he never gets back. That's it. He never gets back to anything. He's lost it all then, and he kind of knows it. We don't really even know it yet as viewers, but he has. So I'm watching it this time because I was breezing through a bunch of these today, just kind of like touching in and out, and I'm like, oh, Kevin.
You know? Which, you know, is not, if you look at if you look at the stories about the biblical prophets, not only did most of them often not come to a good end because they spoke truth to people in power who didn't want to hear it, but the whole process of being chosen and pulled out and different usually didn't go well for them. They may have done something important, but it didn't lead to their happiness. So in that sense, they, you know, kind of worked with the Lord. Well, as usual, we have blown through the time. Any final thoughts here before we go into where to find everybody? Did we miss any episodes you really want to touch on quickly? All right. Well, then you guys know the drill. Tell us, please, where people can find you online. Carol?
You can find me on Twitter as true_firesign10. You can find all of my stories on AO3 under Fire Sign 10. And you can find me on Facebook in the TFWNC group and here on Continuum.
Awesome. Elektra?
You can find everything about me at untilmidnight.com.
And Melissa?
You can find me stalking and causing trouble on the Supernatural Convention TFWNC group.
And you can find me at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com, all the social media that is attached to that. WinchesterFamilyBusiness.com, Supernatural TFWNC on Facebook, but mostly here on Continual. So thanks to all of you for another wonderful panel. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There'll be more Supernatural coming up soon here on Continual. So we'll see you online.